stressing out. Yeah, so okay, so thank you again for coming. I probably, if you're here, you're entrepreneurial in spirit and or maybe wanting to do things a little bit differently. Since there are only a few of you, do you want to say hello and who you are, or where you're working?
Yeah, my name is Fung Pham, and I am a certified patient advocate for cancer. And I just took Dr. Nasha's class on the metabolic approach to cancer. And one of the biggest component to healing is working on the emotional side. And so that's why I'm interested in this.
Oh, that is amazing work that you're doing. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to say hello? You don't have to, of course.
Sure.
Okay.
My name is Carissa Fields, and I am located in Michigan, and I am certified as a professional and a Christian life coach, and have a very strong interest in trauma and how I could potentially become a coach, and how that could impact the potential work that I'd be looking to do in the life coaching realm.
Okay, great. So you're kind of already in the coaching sort of field. Sounds like.
Yes.
Great. Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else want to say hi? Yeah.
Just a quick one to say hi. I'm Avril. I'm on the southeast coast of UK, so it's about 8 o'clock in the night. It's really nice to be here. I'm an emotional well-being and resilience coach. I am a certified life coach. I have my own journey with post-traumatic stress disorder and went into post-traumatic growth a couple of years ago before I did my coach training. So I'm always bringing that part of me front and center to my practice, but I would love to know more about what the information that you're going to take us through today, because I am looking at how I can bring this type of information to my clients. There's been a lot post-pandemic, but also in terms of what people are going through in the wake of narcissistic abuse or other types of abuse and trauma. So hello.
Hi, welcome. Gosh, from so far. What an honor. Yeah. Well, okay. If it's okay, I'm just going to keep on moving so I get everything in that I promised all of you. And if others want to introduce themselves towards the end, that's fine. And you're welcome to. So just in terms of creating a safe and trauma-informed context for our learning today, here's some suggestions and requests. Generally, I like to have cameras on, especially when it's a really big training. This is fine given that it's smaller. Assume positive intent. We obviously want to be professional and support each other through creating a safe learning environment. Use the chat respectfully. I only have to say these things because sometimes things do happen during trainings. But I do assume that all of you are professionals and adults, and we want to be kind to each other, of course. So the objectives today, hopefully by the end, not hopefully, you will be able to differentiate coaching from therapy. You'll be able to identify aspects of the job that either can be delegated to coaches or how coaches can themselves integrate themselves into other contexts. And I will talk about some of the business of coaching. Of course, this is coming from a Western lens in the US in terms of how our business is managed here. So hopefully some of those things apply to those of you in other parts of the world. Participants will be able to describe additional supports that coaches can offer that psychotherapists or other types of providers are unable to. So this is me. Hello, I've been in social services for 30 years. I was in private practice for 5 years. I'm a clinical social worker. I founded ITTC, which is an outpatient mental health clinic in Portland, Oregon. It's still in operation, and I still am running the company alongside I have a business partner as well. I am the creator and delegation leader of the multicultural trauma training, which was hosted in Rwanda until COVID changed everything. But I am going back to Rwanda this February for another delegation for the coaching. I have presented in a variety of places, and I'm trained in lots of trauma-focused modalities. And I'm a trauma specialist, and I love working with this population in various capacities. So I just put this picture here because it was fun. Trauma. So in the introduction to Orenda, it's a separate company from my clinic. And it's because it's doing something entirely different. I'm not here to provide treatment. I wanted to fill a gap for that exists in terms of access to care, and also the degree of support that clients require when they are moving through trauma with their therapists or day-to-day life, etc. There's just not enough therapists out there in the world to meet the need, and also the need is sometimes greater than what a therapist and a client can navigate together. So I want coaches that are trauma informed to be able to fill that gap. So it includes the Orenda. I wanted not only to create a course, but also a community, because coaching and therapy and a variety of helping professions, those can be very lonely. They can be lonely jobs. So we need each other to support each other through the work and learn from each other lifelong, hopefully. So I offer a trauma coach certification and a certificate of completion. They're both 100% either asynchronous or online, with the exception of the Rwanda delegation. And coming soon, I'm going to be adding an online group for therapists specifically who work with complex trauma and dissociative disorders. So those are our offerings. How did I get here? Again, working, within a leadership capacity in a clinic and creating a clinic. It's very clear, and was clear even when I started the clinic, that there are gaps in care. And these have even been highlighted more when I travel to, well, specifically Rwanda, where, for example, 25% of the population would qualify for a PTSD diagnosis, but their mental health system is quite young. So there is a lot of demand, and there's not nearly enough need. There's also not as many people who have access to higher education in order to fill the need in low and middle income countries. So coaching is my answer to that problem. There are lots of other answers too, but I hope to share this with folks all over the world. Traditional therapy model is inaccessible to most people. It's too expensive. Most people can't come every week. It's just not a realistic or sustainable model in and of itself. And weekly therapy has not been shown to be superior to either biweekly therapy, group work, or peer supports. So we kind of, as therapists, I know that, or it sounds like not all of you are therapists, but just kind of looking at ourselves in the mirror as a mental health care provider, what's working, what's not working, and how can we renegotiate what is offered to our clientele in order to realistically support them sustainably. Also, the World Health Organization has made recommendations on task shifting or task sharing in order to build capacity and expand human resources in healthcare. We also want to decrease the isolation for therapy providers and other types of providers. Having someone work with you and have another pair of eyes on your clients can be it's just so comforting, honestly, and to have some extra support for both sides is really healthy, I believe. I also view trauma coaches as prophylactic, in that having that support there, even if it's not used, can prevent crisis, especially in the context of when we're processing or working through past trauma. There's more and more data and research coming out around epigenetics, where PTSD or the PTSD switch is turned on in the next generation, regardless of exposure to adverse experiences. So with that in mind, having adequate support for a large group of people, especially given, we have just been through a whole bunch of stuff collectively, and I suspect that there's going to be fallout over the next decade or so, and having extra providers and support is preventative in nature for generations to come. And that is part of my overarching philosophy behind Orenda, is that we're not only supporting those in front of us, but we really have the future and the trajectory of generations to come in mind as well. And yes, there's been just an explosion in demand. My clinic for a while there had a wait list of almost a year for people to get in for treatment. So it's gone way down. It's much better. But still, there's just been an explosion. So why trauma coaching? I mean, I want to just throw a few numbers at you. I didn't go too heavy on the science just because of the length of the training. But in the US, PTSD affects about 8% of Americans. Globally, it's 7% on average, and that tends to vary depending upon, whatever stressors are going on within a particular region at any given point in time. But that's a lot of people, and it really did go up during COVID. So we're seeing more people who are symptomatic or whose past trauma was activated in response to being out of control for a couple of years. Pretty scary stuff. So again, there aren't enough providers to go around. Low and middle income countries experience greater gaps between providers and demand, and we just need more support, as I mentioned. I do believe that coaching is the future. Not that it means that therapy is going away, but rather more and more we're seeing that, employee assistance programs. I have Kaiser Insurance, one of the biggest health insurance companies in the US. They have coaching available, mental health coaches available to their members. I'm just seeing it more and more, and I do believe in it as a way to offer income earning opportunities to people and to be supplemental in terms of support. And honestly, not everybody has to process their traumatic memories, which is what the therapist is for, in order to feel better. The support sometimes is healing in and of itself. So what is coaching versus therapy? Coaching is skills-based, present and future-oriented, emphasis on growth mindset. It's unregulated in the United States. I am a proponent of future regulation of coaching or any kind of thing that is, humans helping humans. I think we should all be regulated, but as of right now, it's not. It's a supportive role, strengths-based, whereas therapy is, and I would also say that coaching tends to be couched in positive psychology and humanistic psychology orientations. Whereas therapy is about assessment, diagnosis, and treatment. Those are very distinctive. Therapy can be past, present, and future-oriented. It's both strengths and deficit-based. It is highly regulated, and therapists employ a variety of modalities and theoretical orientations. I'm just going to check the chat really quickly. Hi, Sarah. I see you. You're a trauma-informed strategist. Welcome. And a trauma recovery coach. Awesome. A doctoral student in counselor education and supervision from Cleveland. Welcome. So Orenda's approach to trauma coaching, again, it can be supportive. Coaches can have their own coaching practice as well, as is allowed with whatever's allowed within your region. It's skills-based, future-oriented, as I mentioned. Emphasis on supporting survivors in phase 1 of their recovery journey. So what I mean by that as a therapist is the standard of care is that we approach working with trauma in 3 phases. The first phase is skills-based relationship building and basically preparing for the heavy lifting of the trauma work. The middle phase in therapy is the trauma processing and moving through the past. And the end phase is integrating those stories and establishing future templates. And where I see coaches is in phase 1, really supporting clients in that phase. And quite honestly, most of my clients spend the majority of their time in therapy in that first phase. So that's a really robust part of the work in terms of working with clients from, from a therapeutic perspective, and where we need a lot of help and support from other providers as well, like coaches. So Orenda's approach is couched in post-traumatic growth theory, which assumes that every person has the capacity to learn, not that we're a proponent of exposure to adverse experiences, of course, but rather that we all have the capacity to take something and have this new wisdom that only somebody who's been through a similar experience would be able to understand, and that we're then able to apply and share that knowledge with other people who have had similar experiences. So that's sort of a very brief introduction to post-traumatic growth. And humanistic psychology is more about the relationship, that we always approach our relationships with unconditional positive regard for the person that we're working with and supporting. My coaching program, just like most, are person-centered, strengths-based, growth mindset, and trauma-informed. I also wanted it to be very comprehensive and include concrete skills that people can apply in their work. And it is distinctive from therapy. Context for coaches, I mean, honestly, anywhere and everywhere, preferably, but school, I could see trauma coaches in schools be very helpful to be able to support kiddos who, whose home life is challenging or has been challenging, and we're seeing some behaviors in those contexts. And being able to identify a traumatized person and correlate their behavior with what's happening gives us a beginning point to begin to support either a child or somebody in a primary care clinic or whoever's showing up in the ER, etc. So understanding behavior through the lens of trauma and adversity can help us feel more empathic, but also come up with some concrete strategies to support. Community health settings, foster care settings, direct human services, of course, or any kind of youth program. I would hope that in places where we have children who have lost their parents, that we would be able to support them in an informed way as well, and just have coaching or people trained in trauma specifically in those contexts to support people in a safe and informed way. So what can coaches do? One of the things that I wanted to put in the program is, because this is something that I feel is often missing in the mental health care system as it exists right now, and that is support between appointments. Therapists can't typically, and doctors, whoever, can't typically be available for their clients all the time or every day. It's not even ethical for us to do that. But at the same time, more support is needed. So providing bridge appointments that are very focused on skills and managing behavioral challenges or symptoms in between therapy appointments, I believe is going to help with crisis prevention, help clients during times of stress or throughout trauma processing. What I've noticed when I do start doing the trauma work with my clients, well, and we know that this from the research too, it's very dysregulating actually and distressing. So having somebody available to provide concrete support that is housed in the here and now and separate from the trauma narrative can be really helpful and prevent people from going into crisis. We can help, coaches can provide trauma-informed administrative support in broader settings, organizational settings. Sometimes, as somebody who I have administrative staff and they're wonderful, and if we don't train them in how to navigate complex conversations or large emotions, etc., our clients can be distressed, and so can the staff. And so approaching these conversations through a trauma-informed lens really softens those kinds of conversations and teaches us to think ahead and support our clients and anticipate their needs in informed ways. Also providing skills-based interventions that are commonly taught during phase 1 of trauma treatment. That's something that I would lean heavily on coaches for in my practice personally. And examples of those kinds of interventions would be skills around managing emotion, sleep hygiene, just taking care of the body generally, identifying behavioral goals that are very concrete and measurable that clients can work on, and coaches can work in adjunct with their other providers to ensure that the client is getting a wraparound approach to their healing journey. Coaches are great for accountability and check-ins around skills-based homework. With therapy, it's really difficult to squeeze all that into an hour. And I would just, just having somebody else help and support that, that component of the work would be great, or is great, I should say. Provide support in planning for and managing medical appointments. A lot of clients or people with trauma don't want to go to their doctor, have been traumatized by the medical field specifically, and just are avoidant of being touched or being surprised, etc. So there is this sort of potential for degradation of health over time due to the avoidance of engaging in a healthcare system generally. So I like to include planning for medical appointments, dental appointments, all of those things, and communicating with those kinds of providers so that the client has a voice and the provider also is prepared for triggers. I have lots of examples of how things have gone wrong in medical settings, but we just don't have enough time to talk about that. But so I have some concrete tools in my training around planning for medical appointments and all of that. Decrease the isolation of therapy, as I mentioned, building a team around the client that's more cost effective than therapy alone. Coaches can facilitate skills groups and a variety of coaching groups around trauma, and can do follow-up check-ins when they're struggling, when clients are struggling. So, but this is always the hard part, right? That we have this idea, and life coaching has been around for a while, so it's not as though the concept of coaching is new, but the financial component can be challenging because not all insurance companies here in the US pay for anything that resembles coaching, etc. Not everybody can afford to pay privately, and coaches are sometimes quite expensive. So this is kind of a way to begin to play with, or these are some suggestions around how to play with reimbursement and what kind of options you have as someone in your own business, So insurance reimbursement, again, that's tricky. Typically, coaching is not paid for. However, skills training will be paid for under some insurance plans. And peer support billing is something that is also available under some insurance plans. Sometimes the tricky part is that you have to be a certain kind of provider to be able to bill for those services. But it is possible. And the other thing that is possible is to negotiate with insurance companies. It doesn't sound very fun, and it isn't, but it's possible. And insurance companies are going to be motivated to do things for less money, at least our model in the US, that's the way it works. So private pay options, of course, you can do sliding scale. The one thing that I always suggest around private pay, and there is a whole chunk of curriculum around the business component of coaching in the training, but accessibility is a whole, it's a big piece of the motivation behind this course. So I do want people to be able to access it, and you as coaches need to be able to support yourselves also. So with that in mind, and with equity in mind, if you have private pay options and you do a sliding scale, I just recommend that you have a policy around that, and that the sliding scale discounts are distributed equally versus depending sort of subjectively based on the story or circumstance or whatever. So just have rules about it and then follow your own rules about it so that you're ensuring that you're being fair. There are subscription models are up and coming, that you can subscribe to my coaching program or platform for this amount of money. And then with that, you get a certain amount. Those are nice because they ensure payment for you. And that helps the client remain engaged. So it helps. I like subscription models for those reasons. For other reasons, sometimes I don't like them, but that's one possibility. And then another thing that is very possible is offering packages for coaching, even therapy, or if you're in a medical setting, offering packages for coaching plus something else, and kind of smushing those things together. So those are a variety of models and billing options available for you to explore. And hopefully those are helpful. And then other business considerations. Again, reimbursement. How are you going to get paid? And if you're working with insurance companies, it costs a lot to get paid, actually. We have a billing company, and we have electronic medical records that ensure we're in compliance with it, and all of those things are very expensive. So if you're doing that privately, it's less expensive if it's just you, but getting paid for when you bill insurance will cost you either time or money or both. So something to consider in terms of your business model. The infrastructure, are you going to be on your own? Or are you going to work within a larger system? And if you're going to be on your own, what kind of infrastructure do you need to run your business? If you're working within an organization, is the organization able to somehow support your work and you? So that figuring out how to do that. So concretely, for example, how many times a week is a business going to agree for a coach to be able to communicate with clients? Because generally we need to be consistent around whatever those rules are and manage those boundaries really helpfully and clearly. So frequency of care, frequency of visits, those are pieces of the infrastructure that we want to consider when you're creating a coaching business. Liability is a little bit tricky just because, again, the field is unregulated. There are malpractice insurance companies that are designed specifically for coaches. And so in the US, I recommend researching those. And when you research those, make sure you look into what is excluded in your insurance policy. Because an insurer, a malpractice insurance company is going to be motivated to exclude the things that people actually litigate for. So research your malpractice insurance well, but it isn't very expensive here in the US. In terms of business, just having really clear messaging as a coach, that you're a coach, you're not a therapist, and you recognize the difference is important. And then having really explicit and clearly defined roles. What do you do and what don't you do, so that clients know what to expect in their work with you, I should say. And I think as part of that messaging, differentiating coaching from any kind of treatment is very helpful. And we don't want to have any blurred lines, starting with our messaging on our websites or social media or however you're going to market yourself. But also in our intake paperwork and all of the ways in which we communicate with our clients, we need to be really clear about what that's going to look like. And having those explicitly spelled out before you even meet your client really helps build a foundation for a healthy relationship in the future. So I did zoom through that. I have a coupon code. We'll come back to this if you're interested. But first, do you have any questions for me? Did I answer everything that you hoped to get out of the course, or did you have more?
Do you have like an outline of the topics you'll be discussing
in the course?
Right.
Yeah, on the website, on Orenda's website, it spells out there are 5 modules, and each module is defined. But basically, I go through what trauma-informed practices are. Let me get my site up really quickly, just so I don't forget anything. And I don't know if all of you have already seen the site or not, but there are 5 modules. There's about 2 hours of video instruction, and then there are a lot of homework assignments, interactions with other students, and opportunities to connect. And we also do a monthly live Q&A. So we have 5 modules, as I mentioned. And we talk about in the first module, I'm nervous, so I can't even remember my own content. But so we have the first module is around orientation to what coaching is, how it's different from therapy, and what you can do with it. The second and third modules they talk about the tenets of Orenda's approach. So I have 5 tenets that guide, that are the framework for working with clients. And those are around self-efficacy. So we're going to assume capacity and strength in all people, for example. 1 second, I'm going to move there. We approach all people equally, and we do acknowledge systemic oppression as being relevant to all people and as being, I would say, a variable in terms of how much somebody's exposed to over time and how their trauma is going to manifest. So that's one of the modules. The middle modules get into the specifics of coaching, such as, intake, how to do an intake, how to write goals, how to write objectives, how to interact with clients in an informed way, and how to ensure that you're meeting the goals that have been set forth by the client. And the final, the largest module, I would say, and the longest and most robust is the ethics component, which is the last module. Moving backwards, though, I forgot to mention that in the 4th module, we also talk about the business of coaching, and we do meetings around, what do you need to do to set up a business, the fundamentals of registering your business, of getting insurance, of, taking care of all of those logistical components that will protect you as a coach and a business owner, and also get you set up to practice legally and wherever you reside. So that's a general outline of the organization of the course. 5 modules, introduction. The middle 2 modules are really concrete about how to work with the clients and how to get them set up and how to know that you're making progress. And then the final one is the ethics module. Any other questions?
Yes, my question is, do you find that other therapists would be receptive to working with trauma coaches in this regard? There's been a lot of therapists out there that have done a lot of criticizing of coaching industry and don't seem to be very much interested. And so just wondering like what your experience is being already in this realm for a long time, and like, do you think we would be well received approaching other therapists to work with them in this kind of capacity?
That is such a great question. Because yes, you're right. I mean, I was at a recent conference and boy, they get mad at me. Sometimes therapists do. But I'm a therapist, so I feel really comfortable with the decision to create a coaching program. I do think that it's going to depend. A lot of the therapists that meet with me about the coaching program want to shift away from therapy because it's working, components of it are really effective and great, and I would never want it to go away, but also it's not quite sufficient and not enough people have access to it, as I mentioned. So I have been meeting with a lot of therapists that have had it. They've had it with insurance companies. They've had it with, just the infrastructure around mental health in the US, and are moving towards coaching themselves. So there's that demographic that I'm seeing. And then there are therapists that, are definitely not on board. There's plenty of research behind coaching, for example, and these are the arguments that I have that, with DBT, the coaching component has been found to be one of the most effective aspects of dialectical behavior therapy. So that extra support there's a lot of research behind just that, So we have research backing coaching and peer supports and all of those things as legitimate. And I think that in the early phases, when you're doing something innovative, there's always going to be skeptics, which is a good thing. So some people will be receptive and some people will not be at all.
Okay. I just see it as I've seen this a while, maybe a year and a half ago, where I just kind of thought about all, like you mentioned in the beginning, all the therapists who are overbooked. And I was like, well, wouldn't a coach be, able to kind of assist their load in any capacity? And so that was kind of one of the targets that I was thinking about. But I know, I'm a little nervous about it because I read all the time where they're so critical of coaches, and I eventually want to transition also to pastoral counseling too. So I'm not adverse to, the therapy world at all. I just would like to start with coaching first, and just think, with the way things are going, especially with the youth and mental health, that it would just be great if I, could find some therapists that would be open to me partnering with them and doing this work after, taking your course.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would approach it from a business perspective is doing stuff like this, where you're already going to have an audience that is open to you and curious about what you have to offer and what you have to say. So that helps you collect the right people in your circle. And those that completely disagree, you're never going to agree. So there's no point, in having that battle. But I think, again, in the early work of coaching and establishing it, it's going to take a minute for it to be legitimized. And we just need more research behind it, just like anything else new, and it's really, again, not that new, but so it might be a little uphill, but not impossible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask a second question. Is there any area of therapy or that you don't think coaching is appropriate? So I know you talked about DID. I just a curiosity question. Like, is there ever any area where it's just maybe not appropriate for us to do that, or you feel that based on, like, since it's mostly skills based, that it doesn't matter kind of what realm or area of therapy it is, that coaching could be helpful?
Yeah, that's another good question. I mean, I think that the main struggle that a lot of mental health providers have with coaching is scope of practice issues. So if a coach is remaining within their scope of practice, which is something that is really, that I spell out really clearly in my training, that this is your scope and this is not. And so within your scope of practice as a coach, that would include skills-based work. That doesn't mean that skills-based work, the kinds of skills or whatever, are going to be effective with any particular person. But when you're working on skills and behaviors in the here and now, it's a pretty safe arena. Where things get kind of messy is when you're in the trauma story. And sometimes clients will want to go there, and it would be your job as the coach to make sure that the trauma story is addressed in the right context, which is in the therapeutic context. But that's really, I think, otherwise, as long as you're staying within your scope and you're focusing on skills, present and future oriented issues, then you're okay. I don't see it being inappropriate for any, not that I can think of anyway. Yeah. I used to do behavioral supports before being a therapist, and it was all about that, just focusing on behavior and how, when you behave in a certain way, how that changes your experience in the world. And that's why I think coaching is a key piece of trauma recovery, because we're helping our clients have different experiences that challenge what they pulled out of their trauma story that got kind of stuck, so I know that wasn't exactly an answer to your question, but
No, that was very helpful. No, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Are there any other questions or comments?
I do have another question.
Okay.
So I took the Heart Math class, the Heart Math Institute class on trauma, and it was really good. I learned a lot about, where it is and the background, but I kind of found it hard to have like a concrete way of using that to support the emotional part besides kind of knowing where they're coming from.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping for something to really actually is really concrete, where it's going to hold my hand and guide me through that conversation. And I think you mentioned there were 2 modules on this, and I just want to ask you how concrete is it? Is it step by step?
Well,
Yeah.
it is, I mean, it's concrete because that's what behavior is, in my mind. Whereas insight is way more abstract. So the whole coaching program was designed around providing concrete, like an outline of how to do what and when to not do something. And so, yes, it's concrete. I designed some worksheets and all of those things to help guide what to do with someone, when and when not to do something with someone. So yes, it is very concrete, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll open a worksheet as an example. So I have a lot of the things that we work on in this coaching program, because in my mind, I designed it mostly for people with complex trauma. So layered trauma over, throughout development, basically. And complex trauma, along with, simple PTSD, which does not mean that the incident was meaningless. It just means that it's just one and doesn't exist in a context of other forms of trauma. But with that in mind, things like communication and boundaries are very challenging for people with interpersonal trauma or trauma throughout childhood. So we have lessons on how to communicate safely and effectively. So there are worksheets on assertive communication, how to say no, how to not just say no, but to honor no in other people. So we have those worksheets, and then we have, I like to, in the very beginning, help us think about our clients in a different way. And that is, not what's wrong with you, but tell me everything that's right with you. What are all the things that you're bringing to the table right now that will help you and help me move through this together? So, and that's what Orenda was named after. Orenda is, it was a term coined by the Iroquois nation here in the US. And it means that there's something that we all have inside of us that's unique to us that allows us to exert some sort of influence on the world around us and on ourselves. And so as coaches and as a therapist, I'm always looking for those things. What is your superpower? And we want to be able to help our clients find that and identify it within themselves. So I've worksheets around that too. I'm just looking at all of the things I have that I could share with you that are concrete. And then again, I have some other worksheets just around, we practice identifying the goals, articulating them, and making them measurable. And as soon as you do that, then it becomes very concrete in terms of, I want to sleep 3 times a week, 6 hours a night, because people with PTSD have a lot of difficulty sleeping. So then we're going to do some behavioral, the approaches are going to be behavioral during the day. We know that tending to your sleep hygiene happens during the day, and you're more likely to sleep better at night. So we'll talk about how to write goals and objectives that are concrete. I will exercise 3 times a week in the morning, or I'll go for a walk in the morning 3 times a week in effort to improve my sleep and manage my mood. That's a very concrete goal. So we work on, being able to really clearly identify what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and how we know that we have done what we had planned to do. Did that answer your question around structure and concrete?
Yeah, thanks.
Mhm.
Get better insight.
Yeah. Sarah, I'm going to read your question and respond to it. Let's see. How long is the certification, i.e. how many hours of investment? And do I provide synchronous supervision or is it entirely asynchronous? Do you have a sponsor for the certificate or does it come from the Orenda project? Yeah, all great questions. So I would say, I mean, my students right now probably are going to finish the program within about 6 months from starting. And I would say they seem to be putting in a couple of hours a week to get there. Not always, though. Sometimes they take a little pause and come back. And do I provide synchronous supervision or entirely? It's both. So I provide an optional monthly Q&A. Those have been so much fun because everybody gets to know each other and it's a really neat group of people. But that's optional. You don't have to attend to that if you, if you can't or don't want to. But then the asynchronous piece is that questions are posed in our student group. And I'll respond usually Mondays and Tuesdays, and then the questions build up throughout the week. So that's the way I do it asynchronously as well. I do not have a sponsor for the certification, and this is why. I designed Orenda to be asynchronous for global accessibility. And the International Coaching Federation requires at least 50% of it be live. And I don't want to do that because it goes against the sort of the purpose behind it. So I am hoping that there will be some adjustment to the shift in delivery of these kinds of educational platforms. But for now, I don't qualify for that because I'm not 50% in person or live. So the certification comes from Orenda only, and that's a great question. Any other questions?
Yeah, what's the difference between the online and the trip to Africa training?
Yeah, another good question. So online is what I want to do when we go to Africa is have, I want to capitalize on the opportunities for people to interact with each other there. So the pieces of the coaching certification that require practice with other people will happen there, and the other pieces will remain asynchronous or online. So we'll have about 3 days, we'll have 3 days in Africa in the classroom, and those 3 days we'll be practicing and applying the skills. And then the other stuff you would still need to complete on your own, either before or after the delegation. And then the early part of the delegation also includes cultural immersion, so we can learn about Rwanda's inspiring recovery from 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. They're now one of the cleanest and safest countries in Africa, and the whole philosophy of the country is we are one, which I think is beautiful. And so we provide opportunities to learn about the history behind the genocide and also their recovery within the community. We go to the memorial, and then after 3 days of training in the classroom, then we go to safari and just have fun. So that's how it's different. There's no safari online. Yeah. Any other questions?
Is your training model pretty unique? Like, is anybody else doing it, or is this something that is just the first time?
Is somebody else doing the same model as I am, or a
Yes.
trauma coaching thing?
Well, I guess my question's twofold. Like, is anybody else doing the same model you're doing? But also, I watched the video about the Tutsis and how they healed for the trauma. So I'm assuming, and maybe I misunderstood it, that it was the same kind of model that they've presented there to help. Is that, do I have that right? Or
Well, I would say that actually is really complicated. That's more complicated. And
okay.
my approach is separate from Rwanda altogether, and I want to share it with them, with my colleagues there. But they are, as a mental health care system in Rwanda, developing their own culturally resonant approaches to trauma recovery. Rwanda's also, they are very evidence-based in their work, so anything that they're doing needs to have solid research behind it. So whatever they're creating is based on what's known to be effective for trauma, but also they're adapting it for their own cultural sort of idiosyncrasies. And the recovery, the genocide just happened 25 years ago. So there was a lot of time rebuilding infrastructure, and the mental health care system was born out of that process. So it is still really young. And I wouldn't say, such a huge percentage of the population still has PTSD, of course. But what they've done really well is to create enough safety, which is part of phase 1 in trauma recovery, is creating safety in order to be able to process the trauma. So I would say that Rwanda is sort of moving into phase 2 on a large scale basis, but that is a totally separate thing from my approach to the trauma coach training. And then there's a second piece of your question that I want to answer. I think there are 2 other trauma coaching, programs. I think one of them is started by 2 survivors, which I think is totally legit, and I think they have an ICF accreditation. So if that's important to you, there's not lots, but there are other resources out there besides me. In terms of my approach, I think what is unique about mine is that I'm a therapist. And so from my perspective, I know what I want coaches to be doing and what I don't want them to be doing in terms of scope of practice. And I designed the course around that to really create a lot of safety for survivors in terms of working with a coach or working with a therapist or working with both.
Okay, thank you. You've answered my question.
Great. Okay. Are there any others? Well, gosh, thank all of you for showing up. I know I have about 50 people who are really mad at me right now. So I'm going to reach out to them and share the training via video with them as well. But I really am grateful for your interest and your willingness to be innovative and for showing up at 8 o'clock at night and all of that. So
thank you so much. It was an incredible presentation. It's really lovely. Thank you.
No, it's really nice to meet you, and feel free, please, to stay in touch and ask any questions, etc. So I'm around.
Will do. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, take good care. Bye.